a photographer. She's a painter. She's done tons of like illustrations as you've seen here. This is one of her collections where she basically found a ton of archival photos from old Essence and Jet magazines and replaced the women's hair with crystals and gems. And I really love this project. I think it's just so fun and super like whimsical. And in a big way, but with no words, it says that me or this person here who I can identify with, a Black femme person, is as special as a gem and as a crystal. And also with the positioning with that on her head is really beautiful to me. Another artist is Kenesha Sneed, who is an illustrator. She's a ceramicist, also an amazing Black woman artist. And the reason why I brought those two up, and there's several other, but I never saw myself as an artist. I always saw myself as a creative person or something adjacent to it. And I never rejected myself as an artist, but growing up, I went to a performing arts high school, middle school, and high school. So I was surrounded by tons of artists, and my school was pretty diverse as far as the student body. But when it came to, you know, who we were taught about, who we learned about, it wasn't as diverse. So I saw artists who were mainly white men, and I'm not a white man, and if I only saw that in that industry and felt that, okay, maybe this, I think subconsciously that this wasn't for me. It took tons of unlearning to realize, okay, I could do this, and that's me on the side. Going into storytelling, I have some of my favorite either platforms or individuals who have taught me so much, or just have helped me to find my own voice. We have Sonia Renee Taylor, who is a brilliant woman, speaks on so many social topics, and really just blows my mind every time and allows me to just think and see differently and to imagine differently. Pose, being, on main media and telling the story of Black, queer, poor people in New York who are fabulous and talented, and have stories outside of just what a lot of people can fixate on, which is their sexuality or their gender. Myleik, who is an amazing businesswoman who I look up to a lot for a lot of just personal development, storytelling, and just vulnerability. She's a huge advocate for therapy and changing your opinions once you learn new information, which I think is so important. And our ego stops us from doing that sometimes, but I think that has been really awesome for me to be able to change my opinions. Erica Hart and Ebony, Erica is a sex therapist and educator, and Ebony is their partner. And they just showed me a beautiful example of Black queer love, as well as both people who are doing really great in their careers, which I look up to. And then I have my platform here, the Self-Care Cafe, which I'm using as a platform for storytelling and art and documenting our experiences of well-being. Oops, sorry. And then lastly, we come to space. So Communion and the Studio are two workshops that I personally host. Communion is a space specifically for women and non-binary folks of color. And then the Studio is a space for creatives, entrepreneurs, and visionaries. And it's a workshop, both are workshops that I really enjoy. And these are ways that I was able to take these ideas and turn them into tangible spaces for us to be able to experience together, but also action those values that we spoke about. Black Girl Owned was a huge inspiration for me. The founder, Lauren Ash, and BGIO was huge as far as seeing myself in the wellness space and seeing myself as a wellness entrepreneur and what that looks like, and that could be a sustainable and valid career path for myself. And then I think about Soul Train. I was watching like a documentary the other day, and when we talk about Black joy and just Black freedom and Black space, you can't not think of Soul Train. Boy, oh boy, if I was alive during that time, you would see me on those stages for sure. But I think Soul Train is just a beautiful manifestation of just Black people saying we want space to just live, not to be told how to live, to have to tell people that we exist, that we matter, to leave all that and just be ourselves, which I think is very important for Black people to have those spaces, for us just to be, and not have to always have to validate ourselves. So together, you know, what do these three things create? Which is the question I was asking myself, and something that I think is important, or that I like to experiment with and study, which is like building up our spaces with these in mind, and in action, cultivate safer spaces for those most systemically vulnerable. And so something that is challenging is when we are, you know, spaces are to be, think about, I guess, like, nonprofits and kind of like white saviorism. And if you have somebody who has less experience, if you think of it about any job, if you have someone with less experience on resonating and supporting and protecting people, then that person doesn't have the experience to create that safe space. So when I think about folks that we constantly see in power, it's not about creating a safe space and supporting people. It's about keeping a power dynamic, which is just tired at this point and no longer works. And we need people to be leading spaces who are also just as passionate about building the experience to create spaces, safe spaces for people, and not just want to be leading, which I think is very important and goes lastly, and we need to kind of put that more in the forefront. And I come back to these thoughts because I would love for you all to think about this for yourself, and maybe it will bring up some questions or ideas or experiences that you might want to share or have a question about. And so I just have those here for us. And if you care to stay in touch with me, here are some ways that you can access that. So I'm on Instagram as Beauty as a Metaphor. And then the Self-Care Cafe is on as We Are Self-Care Cafe. My emails are here, and then my website is here. And then, yeah, that's all. I hope I didn't go too fast, but I'm really more so interested, in asking or answering any questions, or just kind of having a conversation and not just blabbing away. So thank you.
Not at all blabbing, Tobi, not at all. And I'm sure you're hearing rapturous applause right now. I'm certainly hearing it. So there's so many things I want to ask. But I'm going to start this. You said that you never saw yourself as an artist, and you did tell us a little bit about why you felt that way, especially through high school, the way in which you were taught. I'd like you to talk a little more about your art practice. You just sort of mention it, and then you sort of moved on. I'd like to hear more about your practice.
Yes, my practice has been. This has been my practice, honestly, with my art. So within art, I've had to find art that resonates with me. I've had to find stories, so artists and their stories and their processes that resonate with me, and then spaces for me to action that and to experience and experiment. So one space, I guess I'll start with space, is this room here that I'm sitting in, which is our second bedroom, which I've converted into my office and studio. the first time that I've had dedicated space for my art, which for me is a huge blessing. I've always been on the floor of my bedroom or my bed, or, you know, a table, a kitchen table or something. And this is the first time that I've had like my own space to just like come in, close the door, sit and do work, which I really enjoy. So in here, I have like crystals around. I have pictures of my family. I have my ancestor altar. I have some of my own art. I have art of friends. And that for me just puts me in a space surrounded by just all this goodness. And it's inspiring. So that's a space that I really love. As far as my like process, I would say I'm really always inspired by color and color interaction. I'm inspired by texture. I'm inspired by abstraction. I think like making things plain. I don't know if that's like, it doesn't sound interesting, but for like extracting things down, I feel like is really interesting to me. And as far as just like kind of different themes or stories that are in my mind, I'm always inspired by women, Black women, queer folks, and other artists, I guess, who also use a lot of color, and just seeing the different ways that it can be explored and expressed. And I'm still finding my creative process. I feel like it's changed over time, and I've had to reboot it this past year because I realized before I was entering my practice with insecurity, and I had to really put my foot down with myself like earlier this year and say, you know, when you're doing your art, there's no place for insecurity. You're not, you know, unsupported in this space. Therefore, any doubts or thoughts have to leave, and you can pick those up later. But when you're here and you are honoring yourself and your creativity, that has to kind of be dropped out the door. Because for me, my art and creativity is a space to be free, and I can't do that if I'm being weighed down by, you know, insecurities that aren't real, that are just have been fabricated and told to me to believe. So yeah, I think really just stories, I mean, that really is inspiring to me. I think it's really important. And important isn't even, that's an understatement. It's like necessary that we all know each other's stories. I think to like strip somebody of their story is to strip them of their existence. And I have personally, as a Black person, have history of my experience being stripped. So it's really important that I fill those voids, and that I learn about my history, and I learn about history in general. So yeah.
I've got another question here, but I just note that Dre writes, they love to see your paint shirt hanging in the background.
Oh.
I like that too. Yes. So one of the questions is, how can we start to have genuine conversations? Simple question.
Yeah, it's genuine. There's the $1 million answer. How can we start having genuine conversations? I think you have to just, I guess the thing for me isn't genuine. I know that's the question, but I guess my point is it's not about, we can have genuine conversations. There's Red Table Talk. There's, what is that card game on YouTube where you ask different questions and super vulnerable questions? We have tons of things like that. We have social media, which is a space of so many genuine conversations. What we need is genuine and intentional actions, which is why I had that bolded on that last slide, because conversation is comfortable. and we can talk, like, for an example, we can talk about racism all day, but if we aren't actioning anti-racism, then having genuine conversations about racism is just emotionally taxing for Black people, is traumatizing for folks who experience it, and then also doesn't offer any kind of better, brighter future or safety. So I think about, I think someone earlier talked about like stepping out of like your own bubble and things like that. And for a lot of people, a lot of people with not privileged identities, staying in your bubble is literally a sense of safety. It's a life or death situation, as all of us can see with the several murders that have happened in the past just couple of weeks. For some people, staying in your bubble is a sense of just comfort. And then for some people, it's an act of resistance to stay alive. So I think about that for like Black trans women who are always open to being inclusive and talking to other people. But the question is, are others entering with that same intention, or is it an intention to harm? So I think we're genuine in our conversations, but we're not genuine and safe and intentional always with our actions. So I'm not just for conversations, but I'm with conversations and actions as a partnership. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
No, thank you for that. Can you speak to the value in allowing ourselves to receive joy and pleasure without needing to earn it or reciprocate it or work for it?
Ooh, that's a sexy question. Yeah, I think the true joy of that is to truly just be with yourself at its core. And that is not something that we constantly have tons of experience with. We're always with a hat on, whether that's, you know, at work or in family or in your relationship. And then we have the same kind of sometimes projections onto ourselves, just one-on-one. If we have a you know, I could say something like, oh, you're so stupid for that. And I'm sure not to say things like that about myself, but we get in the habits of saying things like that about ourselves, or is this any good? Or am I even worthy? Or I don't look good in this. And when you're able to validate yourself just based off yourself, accepting your flaws and all, or even the things that you're uncomfortable about, and still being like, well, this is just me though. There's a true sense of like freedom with that. There's a true sense of just like a real understanding of like who you are, not in relation to somebody else, but just who you are to yourself. And I think if we spend more time reflecting on who we are and who we want to be for ourselves and how we want to show up, that only allows other people to release those as well. But removing external validation from your own practices of pleasure and joy are incredible to your soul, to your heart space. It really, I believe so.
Thanks for that. As you have questions or observations, make certain to put these in the chat for us. Jamie Wells says, no room for insecurity in art. Great reminder. And it is a great reminder. And you've talked about this in other sorts of ways, but I wanted to ask more sort of directly, what do you see as the conditions for secure spaces?
The conditions, like what does that look like, or agreements, or?
All those sorts of things. What does it take to sort of build secure spaces? What are the ingredients? What are the requirements?
Yeah. Well, so I see this as my art. So it's all an exploration for me. So I'm learning and trying different things as I go. So I don't have the full recipe for this, but some things that we can consider, I think mainly is who's leading or who has, it made me think about like and I was in the shower actually, and it made me think about like inclusion and diversity. So we hear about like inclusion and diversity all the time. Again, that kind of more so for me aligns with that genuine conversation. So it can be a little lofty when it comes to tangible actions. And after kind of thinking through all of this, I made it up in my head, but I'm like, I don't want necessarily inclusive spaces. I want secure spaces. And the difference for that, for me, is inclusion is, again, not just becoming you're included. And so the difference between being included and then being secure means that you have a place in this structure. That means you have power in leadership in that space as well. And so when I think about some of the things that make for those safer spaces is being really cognizant on, who's leading, who, and like what are the dynamics of their leadership, and then who are we attracting into the space, and what are we asking of those in the space? What responsibilities come with, if you come into this coffee shop, even though we're a coffee shop, our values are rooted in this idea of security and safety for our community. So there won't be any transphobia happening in our place. And so when I think about these safe spaces, it's not just in like social justice spaces or things like that, because I'm not even in those spaces, but I think it's important that we build all spaces with these things in mind. We can a lot of times see certain things as, oh, this has nothing to do with race or class or gender, and it does. And so even if you think about something like Walmart, just a store you go to get some toilet paper and face wash and some flour or something, if you think about, the ethics of how maybe the store is ran, and this isn't just about Walmart, but it doesn't exclude them either, but just in general, how is this place ran? So that has to do with how we treat our employees, how we treat our customers, partnerships that we take on, and just kind of programming our spaces that we allow. Do we offer meditation to our employees that work double shifts? Do we, what does that look like? And so there's many different ways that there's many different options for that. But it's not exclusive to just a social justice space. And I think really starting at leadership, looking at, again, the experiences that are brought into the space, and then the responsibilities that we're all holding each other accountable, so that it's being taken care of from so many different perspectives and doors.
I think you and I might have talked about this the other day, but I'll ask it here as well. Do you see space making as a kind of art?
Oh yeah, for sure. Space making is definitely an art, because I mean, we've all been to an event where you're like, you walk out kind of like you weren't moved, or you didn't make a connection, or maybe you didn't feel included in the conversation, or it was maybe hard to enter a conversation with people if there's a lot of different clusters or things like that. So, and we all know the difference of like going to an event that we walk away like, wow, that was so good. Like, I met one person, or I just had a really good conversation, or this person said something, or when I walked in, someone was there to greet me. It's small things like that that I think sometimes we can overlook in events, because it's just, okay, what's the main thing, this speaker? But I really love to look at those smaller kind of supporting elements, making sure there's someone there to greet you, that you are greeted, that you're not just standing there waiting for someone to say, hey, can I help you, or you have to ask somebody. So I definitely think it's an art, and we have to be, if we're creating spaces, it's on us that are leading those spaces, again, to be mindful about what space are we creating, and then being open to like improving on those spaces as we go, and just being open to that feedback from those who attend.
Thank you for that. Rod Chu writes, thanks for your talk. It sparked a thought. What if the narcissistic, supremacist, lying behavior we see, no names mentioned here, are really a manifestation of deeply seated insecurity? Is there any hope of breaking through these defensive shells to get to dialogue? Another simple question for you to handle, Tobi.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, though, because that narcissistic, it goes back to the question you asked about finding like joy without like just with yourself and without external validation. If your life and your joy has been centered on manipulating and being more powerful over other people, and that's what you're rooted in, then once that is taken, because that was never yours, then you have to sit with who is me? What do I have? What am I secure in? And so a lot of times we step into these power roles as an escape from stepping into our role, into stepping into who we are. So I definitely think that those are connected. And if there's any hope, I mean, there's as much hope as doing the work. So that looks like, making therapy readily available, calling it out, and then also holding space to be accountable and to be supportive. I'm no like therapist, so I don't know exactly like tons and tons of ways to break through those defensive shells. It's something that I am also like looking at, but I think personally my role like as a Black person, as a Black femme person, is I've always had to work at breaking defensive shells. So my time is not always spent on figuring out how to continue to break through defensive shells. I spend a lot of time on building spaces, as David said, of joy and of pleasure and of healing and of community and of connection, because I think it's important to feed into the joy of us, into the pleasure of us, and into the learning of us. Yeah, so I definitely think those are connected, and I'm not really for sure on how to continually break through those defensive shells, other than just like sharing our stories. And a lot of times when we're in the same circle, we can be judging something that our close friend experienced. And that's because we have insecurity in our story, we have a lack of vulnerability. And sometimes we're upholding something that honestly all of us in the back of our minds are like, this thing is weighing me down. And when we can release that, we all can release it. And that's really where the joy comes from, and that true security in yourself.
I'm going to ask one more question because I think this is such a good one, and then and then we're going to open things up. But Sonia asked, you mentioned feeling that you existed adjacent to an artist identity for a long time. What was it that really propelled you forward through that? And how did you navigate taking on that artist identity? Another great question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I joke and say I was forced. So I I have been in the creative space and have recognized it as something that brings me joy and something that I truly love since I was about 8 years old. But up until I just recently started to identify myself as an artist in this past year. So I think growing up, I always kind of just named the thing I was doing. So I was a dancer, and I was an act. Well, I was never an actress, but I went to school for dance and theater. But until I realized I really have stage fright, and I don't actress thing is going to work, but I'll help in tech. So yeah, but I think about just like I was kind of naming the things I was doing. I was in fashion design for a while, and that was kind of my first like medium outside of dance. Dance just felt super like innate to just who I was, and so at the time it didn't feel like I didn't actually name it as my first artistic love. But the first thing that I did step into that I guess I wasn't just in the space, but I had to carve out was within apparel, and always just loved to just cut and sew and iron things on and sew things up and take this and put this on here. And, you know, my family and like childhood friends, like always, we still laugh because they'll be like, you come out and something just cut up and sewn together. But that was my first kind of way of getting my hands moving, I would say, which which was really informative to me, that I like to do things with my hands. So I was always trying. I mean, I'm always someone who is curious and loves to try new things. So I wasn't necessarily insecure in my approach. I was always open to taking classes. I think also having access to that. I didn't have tons of access. I'd never had like a private teacher or private classes. I was thankful to get into my arts middle school and high school, and to get some scholarships for like summer arts programs and things like that. So I was always interested and always giving it a go, but I never saw myself as someone that had positioning or security in that space. It was just, I like it. I enjoy doing it. I think what changed in this past year was that, you know, I was kind of doing the same routine of trying it, not trying it, trying it, not trying it. And I had to just realize that this is something that I want to do. And imagine if you put in the effort that you put into these other things that you also enjoy, but that you use also as a way to escape from doing art. What would it look like if you just tried? This is me talking to me. Okay, Tobi, what would it look like if you just tried it? Not walk into it just saying, oh, I'm not an artist, I'm just here to try, or I'm just here to play or experiment. But if you actually, took it on as, no, I am here to play and experiment, but I want to get better, and I want to do more of the work like this. And so that took some time. It didn't happen like overnight, but I also think I realized in 2016, 17, I wasn't really creating at all. And that was also, I wasn't creating at all. And that was one of like my more depressive states, one of my most depressive states. And that to me was that was probably the first light bulb that said, this thing that you are playing with, not playing in a good way, but just that you're kind of toying with and not really respecting as you should, is something that really keeps your heart beating, really keeps you going. And so that's really what kind of, these past 4 years, I've been each year just trying to get better and better with my confidence with it. And this past year is the most year that I've like kind of pursued it more full time and pitched myself for certain things and gotten opportunities that I would have never guessed. So I am happy that I listened to myself, even on the days where I'm still like, what the heck am I doing?
And that makes us happy as well. Tobi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself and your creative practice.